Well, good morning everyone, and welcome to another motorcycling video. It's Wednesday the 8th of May 2024, and it's about 6:30 in the morning, and I'm off on a morning ride where I set out with the intention of going to my favourite running spot and going for a run. Now, you'd wonder why someone would do that on a wet morning like this, but I hadn't done any running for the week, and I thought it was about time that I got up and did some. So, with all that in mind, I want to talk about social media, something that I said I would talk about at some point. So if you're not interested in hearing about social media or hearing my views about social media, then of course turn the volume down and enjoy the scenery. If you haven't any thoughts on anything I have to say, then you're welcome to add those to the comments when the video is posted. I should say and state the obvious, and that is that I have a presence on YouTube. I have a channel there, and I also have a Facebook page, as many people do, so I'm a user of social media. But the purpose of this broadcast or this video is not to defend either of those platforms or any other social media platform, nor the companies that operate them, nor the high-profile people that are associated with those platforms. It is merely for me to express some thoughts about social media, and for you to either listen and think about them, or disagree with them, or ignore them. The choice is entirely yours. I'm not necessarily trying to influence your opinion and say you should think what I think. I'm just trying to offer my thoughts. I want to be very careful about what I say, because some of the matters that I am going to sort of refer to are either the subject of police investigations, or soon will be, or will soon be before the courts, and I don't want to overstep the bounds in any way in regard to those things. There have been some fairly violent incidents in Australia in the last little while involving knife attacks. There have been some arrests of young men, teenage men, boys, for allegedly being involved in terrorism plots. And then there's been a very unsavoury incident with a group of students at a exclusive school in Victoria who have taken to ranking the female students who attend the same school and are in the same classes as those young men. When I say young men, the individuals in that case are in Year 11, which means they're 17 or possibly 18, so they're certainly in some cases considered to be either adults or close to adults, and in all states of Australia they would be considered to have reached the threshold of the age of criminal responsibility. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that these men have done anything, or young men have done anything criminal, but certainly I think there's a general agreement that what they've done is at the very least unsavoury. Now, what generally happens when these incidents occur, when there's an arrest for some young men for being involved in terrorism, or there's this incident involving these young men in their ranking of their female colleagues or their female students, is that a reporter or reporters are dispatched to the scene of the alleged crime, and somebody in a television studio gives you a bit of background, and they throw over to the live reporter on the scene, who proceeds to tell the audience what it is that the police have said so far and what they've done so far. So the anchor, if you want to call it that person, will say to the reporter, "Tell us what we know now," or "Tell us what has happened." And so the reporter will refer to their notes on their phone or whatever, and they'll give a rundown or a timeline of what's happened. The next question, almost inevitably in every case, seems to be, what is the impact, or what impact has social media had here? And then when the discussion returns to the studio, there'll be somebody who's an expert in social media, terrorism, I'm trying to think of the right word, radicalisation, or child psychology, or something like that, who will be asked to offer their opinion on the very same question. Now, as I said at the beginning of this broadcast, I am not here to defend YouTube or Facebook or X or any of those platforms. I'm not here to defend the people who run those companies or the companies themselves. I'm simply here to put my point of view and you, as I said, can consider it, ignore it, accept it, as you please. Go back to the beginning of this technological communications revolution that began in the late 1980s with the very bad Apple IIe computers and Windows 3.1 and all those other Amstrads and BBCs and computers that were around at the time. They brought us to the point where we are now, where we have all sorts of social media that allow people to communicate with each other on other sides of the world. You can actually sit down in front of your computer with a built-in camera or an additional camera, and you can have live conversation with people who are on the other side of the world, your friends, your family, or people that you don't know other than through the social media. With channels like this one, and thousands, if not millions of channels like it, there are people who have interests that they like to share with other people. So I make videos about motorcycling and about running and various other things that I'm interested in, and I use those as a forum to express some ideas that I have. And I've found an audience. There are some subscribers. There are people who casually flick through and come across the video and maybe watch for 30 seconds and so on. And for the most part, I'm assuming that people either enjoy what I'm offering, are interested in it, or if they're not, they move on without any disparaging comments or feeling as if they need to attack me personally. There are lots of other people who have channels that I'm interested in. I watch lots of videos from people who are runners and talk about running and all the various things to go with it, and sometimes you take away something and learn from it. Sometimes it sparks an idea in me that I then talk about. I like to watch people working on watches and repairing watches, intricate pieces of machinery that I just love to watch them working on. I watch lots of people who review cars for a living and comment on the sorts of things they say about cars. I have a grandson who produces stop motion animations using Lego and his phone, and he bases them on movies that he particularly enjoys, particularly the Jurassic Park movies, but he's also done some on Star Wars, and he posts them to his channel, and he has an audience of subscribers and people who like his videos and comment on them, and to the best of my knowledge, he gets on very well with those people. In other words, all the comments are favourable and encouraging and so forth, and there are people who share a common interest, and I think that is the good side of social media. It's undoubtedly equally true that the technological and communications revolution that began in the 1980s with these Apple IIes and Windows 3.1 and Amstrads and Commodores and BBC computers and so forth, and has brought us to the point where we are now, has brought out the very worst in human nature. Trolls, cyber bullies, sextortionists, and God knows whatever else that are out there in the cyber world or in the internet world, in some cases who interact with you so you know who they are. In some cases they hide behind avatars or anonymous accounts and so on, and bring out and have brought out the absolute worst in people. But, and it's a big but, teasing and bullying and abusive behaviour has always been around, and that's not to excuse it. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that well before the very first computer ever came into anyone's hand, there were bullies, there were people who were abusive, there were people who were teasing other people. It seems almost as if it is a matter of human nature that we find a weakness in someone else and exploit that weakness. So I'm making a point here, for example, that did Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or anybody else, or X or Facebook or Twitter, did it create trolls? I'm saying it did not. I'm not giving them a free pass, but I'm saying it did not create those people. What it did was give those people a forum and an opportunity to do what they would have done anyway. It gives them the same forum and opportunity as the positive social media things I talked about in relation to my own channel and my grandson's channel. It gives those people a forum and an opportunity to meet, to share their awful ideas, to spread their bilious, disgusting thoughts and ideas, and to take their petty revenge out on, or their anger and their disappointment in life, if you like, or whatever it is that they have, out on other people who may be innocent bystanders or maybe just people that they know casually. We think about, for example, the advent of the mobile phone. When the mobile phone was first invented, it was a big chunky thing, and eventually it reduced to a candy bar and a flip phone, and we thought this was a great thing. We could carry this little device around in our pocket. We could ring our friends when we were out and say where we were, tell them what we were doing. We could say if we were going to be late home from work, or late for dinner, or not coming home for dinner, or whatever. If we were out somewhere and somebody else had a mobile phone, they could send us a message where they were if they didn't want to talk to us, and tell us where to meet them and so on. And we thought this was a great thing. It had a little camera so you could take a few happy snaps of what you were doing, and that was about the extent of the mobile phone. But then it morphed into this thing that's about the size of a large block of chocolate these days, that everybody carries around in their pocket, and that you're reminded almost on a daily basis that you could conduct your whole life on this thing. If you go down to the bank to do some business there, the people in the bank will happily tell you that you could do this on your phone. And you think, well, yes, I could, but I want to talk to you, and if I keep doing these things on my phone, there might not be a bank, or there might not be a job for you. But that's an aside. But so we put these devices in our own hands, and then because we wanted to feel safe, we put them in the same device in the hands of our children, so that we could tell our children, well, we're not going to pick you up for violin lesson this afternoon, or you have to go to the babysitters or grandma's after school because I'm busy, or whatever it was. So we thought that every child over about the age of 8 needed a mobile phone. And with the mobile phone, possibly about the time the first iPhone came out, and I'm not blaming Apple or iPhone for this, I'm just making an observation about the progression of these things, we decided that the phone wasn't really for calling people after all, because you're supposed to message before you call. It was for taking photos, and it was for having all these other apps that allow you to do things that you'd never done before, and you never knew you needed to do them. But now that you could do them, it was such a wonderful thing to do. Now, I've got a Samsung phone with a host of apps, and I don't really know what most of them do, and I never use them. But I have the running one, or a running one, and I make good use of that. I guess if I didn't have it, I would still be running. I just wouldn't be collecting data. But the point is, we have these apps that do all sorts of things, and the people who developed those apps probably thought they were doing a wonderful thing when they developed this particular app that allowed people to share this or do that with each other or communicate with each other in a certain way. They probably didn't see the unintended consequence of people doing all sorts of other things with it. Let me give you some examples. I was reading an article in a newspaper recently about a bloke who used to be a police officer but now is a private security consultant, and he was talking about women who try to leave abusive partners, and they call him in and he goes through their phone, and in most cases he finds that their partner has planted some sort of spyware on their phone so their partner knows where they are all the time. Surely the people who developed those apps didn't develop it for that purpose. They developed it so perhaps you could keep track of your children. If they said they were at home and you checked their phone, you found they were somewhere else, you knew you could check that, but surely it wasn't put there so that people could be stalked. He talked about people who had, I think they're called air tags, placed in their personal property, like their handbag or something like that, and they didn't know it was there, but it allowed them to be tracked anywhere at any time. He gave one example which was extraordinary. One lady had one of those fridges. I think it's made by LG, but I'm not sure, and I don't want to blame them unfairly. But it's one of those fridges that when you use the last of the milk or something, it tells you that you've used the last of the milk and you need to get more milk. And when LG developed that fridge, they probably thought, we're doing a great thing here. We're developing this device that'll remind people they're out of milk, and they won't open the fridge one day and go, oh, I feel like a coffee, but there's no milk. Damn. It reminds them before that. But this particular woman, her former partner had found a way to get into the screen and send her abusive messages by it. Surely makers of the fridge didn't intend that to happen, and they certainly didn't create the sort of person that does that. So the point I'm making here in regard to social media is that it did not create the sorts of people who stalk each other, the sorts of people who resort to abuse online, the sorts of people who troll others, the sorts of people who put together lists of female students who attend the same school and rank them according to some obnoxious criteria. My suggestion is that those attitudes existed in those people already, and that social media certainly gave them the tools for where they could meet and find like-minded people and share their ideas. But those attitudes, those traits, those behaviour patterns existed well before social media came on the scene, and if we were to ban all social media tomorrow, those traits would still exist in those people. I was thinking in regard to these students at this school in Victoria who put this offensive list together. The principal was interviewed on the ABC News, and he put his hand up and said, well, we have these programs at our school that talk about respectful relationships and so on, but they're clearly not working. And I had a couple of thoughts, and one was, well, first of all, not everybody gets an A in maths, so not everybody gets an A in respectful relationships, but how difficult is it to understand that the sorts of things that these young men had done were offensive? They're just inappropriate. They're wrong. How difficult is it for them to understand that if their mothers, sisters, nieces, cousins, aunts, or any other female that they knew were to appear on a list similar to the one they created? And if they couldn't, if their first response was, well, that's disgusting, that's just awful, it's appalling that somebody has done that, then they have a problem. And I suggest that the problem is within the student, and would have been within the student, whether or not there was social media or a particular app or a particular piece of software or whatever you want to say that allowed them to disseminate this information. The fact that they even thought about creating the thing is the problem, not the software, not the app. Now that doesn't mean that people like that Facebook and X and so forth get a free pass, or that they are immune from criticism. I'm not suggesting that at all. In fact, it is my firm belief that companies should obey the laws of the country in which they operate. In Australia, we have certain standards in regard, we have what are considered to be community standards. We have ratings for TV programs, we have ratings for movies, we now have labels on CDs for explicit lyrics and so on. We know that in Europe, for example, in some countries in Europe, perhaps not all, but in some countries in Europe, there is a much more relaxed attitude towards nudity than there is in Australia. And so if people are watching world movies or European movies, there are often warnings at the beginning of the movie that says this movie features these things. So the point is, there are community standards in Australia, and there are laws to enforce those community standards in terms of racial discrimination, racial vilification and so forth. And in the case of one of these incidents the other day of violent behaviour, we have the E-Safety Commissioner. Now, I'm not here to defend their job, I'm simply saying that this is the job that they do. They are a person who is at arm's length from the government. They're a statutory office that is appointed by the government, but at arm's length from the government. They presumably have legislation and guidelines that they work under, and they approached X and asked them to take down some offensive material related to a violent incident that occurred in Australia. X declined to do so on the grounds that no one had the right to censor them. They took the matter to court, and the court in Australia found that, well, according to Australian law, the E-Commissioner has the right to do what they asked you to do, and you have to comply because you are operating within Australia and subject to Australia's laws. Now, Elon Musk may well have a point in saying that no country, no government, no individual has the right to censor the rest of the world. But, as I say, these companies operate within Australia and should abide by Australian law. And there were ways in which both X and Facebook and any other form of social media could have done something, I think it's called geocaching or something like that, to prevent that material from being seen in Australia. Because by the standards that we live by in Australia, we say you ought not to be able to view that material and you ought not to be able to promote it. If you want to be able to see it in another country, that's the matter for another country's laws and another country's statutes and courts and so forth. As I say, I think it's the not only the obligation, it is the law that you obey the laws of the country that you operate in. And if you choose not to obey those laws, then of course you can take your platform and go elsewhere. So the point I'm trying to make here with social media is that it's very easy for us to look at and say that thing is to blame for this happening, or that person is to blame for this thing happening, rather than to look at the underlying causes. What is it that causes young men who are going to a very exclusive school, who are wealthy, come from wealthy families, and we know this because the fees per year are $30,000 at this school. What causes these wealthy, well-off young men to think that it's okay to compile a list of offensive comments about female students who attend the same school and are in the same classes and may even be some of the same work groups that they're in? It'd be easy to say, well, it's the software or it's the app that they're using, but that's simplistic, because that attitude existed in those young men well before the app was ever around. It just gave them an opportunity to do what they planned to do. What is it that causes young men, and it's mostly young men who appear to be disaffected and disengaged for some reason, to be caught up in the thrall of people that they generally don't know, but people who recognise their weaknesses and their vulnerability and prey on it and feed them all sorts of false information to encourage them to do the sorts of things that these young men that have been arrested for these terrorism charges have done. Again, it would be easy to say, well, if they weren't in an encrypted app like Telegram or Telegraph or whatever it's called, then they wouldn't do this thing. And I suspect that that's not the case. Somehow, some way, someone would find a way to contact those people and exploit their vulnerability, or exploit their disaffectedness, or exploit their confusion about what it is that I'm supposed to be as a 16-year-old, or what it is I think, or I'm trying to find out my place in the world and my place in life, and this group's come along and told me something and it sounds pretty interesting, so I'll go with that. Those things would have happened, and those confusions, if you like, would have happened anyway. It's just that the app is an easier, more convenient way to do it. It's also a depersonalised way, because you know, the person who is in effect grooming that young man doesn't actually have to ever meet him. He just has to keep feeding him messages that play into the insecurities that the person already has. So the point I'm making here is that social media gets a bad rap. I'm not by any means excusing the behaviour of the companies or the people who operate the companies, but I'm saying there are many positive things about social media, and we need, when we're talking about these sorts of things, to look beyond the social media to the other causes. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed my commentary and the scenery, and I'll talk to you again shortly.